So to start off, let's talk about where you're gonna put your seeds. So normally in previous years when I started seeds at my house, I've always put shelving in my living room that has a south and west facing window. But I have 3 cats now. They love to climb on the shelf, so I wanted somewhere that I could close the door to keep them out of the room, because if the shelves weren't strong enough, then the shelves would tip over, the plants would tip over, they would eat the plants. So it was just kind of a disaster. So this year, I decided to upgrade to a nice sturdy metal shelf. Before this, I had one of those greenhouses, the indoor ones that they're probably around this height, similar size, I guess, and it had like the plastic wrap that goes around it, so it's completely enclosed. I had 2 of those, and I've used them for, I want to say 4 years, and they still do a good job. I still have them, they're still fine, but I find that the shelves themselves were quite flimsy, so if you had a lot of stuff on them, they would kind of bow. I ended up having to put like a piece of wood underneath just to stop them from bowing in the middle. And like I said, my cats would get into them, try to jump up, and those shelves themselves aren't very strong. So this year I decided to upgrade to something a little bit more sturdy. I got this at a local big box store. It's secured to my window here just in case the cats do get in here and decide to jump up. Plus, it'll hold a lot of weight. So I'm glad I upgraded this. This I think will hold more plants than the greenhouses that I had before. So I'm hoping that this will be able to hold most things until my sunroom or the little greenhouse I'm building this year are finished, or the sunroom is warm enough to hold plants. But this is where they'll be at for now. This is a north-facing window, and because I have grow lights, I'm not super worried about the fact that this is north-facing. They're not going to get much out of having this window here, but like I said, it's a room that the door closes, and that was the most important thing to me. All right, let's talk about lighting next. So there are a bunch of different options that you can use to light for your plants. I have decided to go with LED. I like these because they don't heat up, so I don't have to worry too much about the plants getting cooked under the light, because this is just going to provide light without providing heat. These are strip LED lights. It's nice because they plug into each other like this. So there we go. So you can have a large light with only needing 1 plug, which is really convenient. This is almost a little bit too long for this, so I'll probably just do 2 side by side. Something like this, because you want to make sure that all your plants are getting light, so you kind of want to have them spread apart. Or you can buy something like this one. This one here is attached, so it's 2 strips, they're already attached for you, and I do really like this one as opposed to those ones, because just to show you, these ones don't have any way of hanging the lights. So what I've normally done in the past is, when I had that smaller greenhouse, I had a piece of wood, and these came with like little clips that hold the light in place, and I would snap on the lights to the wood. But what would happen is, because the wood was attached to the shelf, I couldn't adjust the height of these lights, and that's something that you really want when you're starting seeds indoors, because you want to put these lights as close to your plants as possible. These lights, although they're good, they're not as bright, of course, as like the sun. So you want to put these as close to your plants as possible so you don't get long and leggy plants. With these ones, it makes it difficult. So what I've done, like I said, is attach these to plywood, or for really small seeds, what I've done is tied string around both sides and then kind of looped the string around the shelf so they'd be hanging like this, which did work, and that's probably what I'll do this year because I don't want to get rid of these. I have quite a few of these right now, so I'll do that. I will loop these around so that they're hanging as close to the plant as possible, so they'll be like an inch above where the plants are. But this one is nice because it has holes for hooks, so you can add like a chain to this and then have a chain hanging and then adjust the chain height. But this is nice because that's included into the actual like body of the lights. So I do really like this version. I do think I'm gonna try getting those, the lights that are like fluorescent shop lights. So they have the little hood around them so that they really disperse the light over your plants. I have enough lights for 3 shelves, so I think I might get one more light, and I'll try that one just to see how I like it. I like that one because you can just replace the bulbs. I like the fact that it has the little hood on it to really make sure that all your plants are getting covered by the light. But this one has been great so far. But once again, this one is short, so it'll only cover like 2/3 of the shelf. So I probably have to keep my plants to one side or get another light that covers this side. But so that's what you need for lighting supplies. And like I said, you do want to make sure that your lights are as close to your plants as possible. So when I'm starting seeds, this is almost sitting right on the seed tray because I want them really close. And then as the plants get bigger, this is just moving up slightly just to accommodate the plants, but it is really just a little bit higher than the plants themselves. And that also is a good trick for when you're starting seeds, making sure that you're starting seeds of similar sizes and similar growth rates in the same tray. I have made the mistake numerous times of growing like tomatoes with something that's really slow growing like eucalyptus. So my tomatoes will be like, you know, this big and my eucalyptus is this big. So once I lift this to accommodate the tomatoes, the eucalyptus isn't getting enough light. So make sure that when you are planting your seeds that you have similar plants in every tray so that way your light can be at a good height for all of them. And that goes the same, or the same thing goes for where you're putting your trays on your shelf. So I could have maybe all of my slow growing stuff on this top tray, have the light really low, whereas this one could be my tomatoes and peppers where the light can be a little bit higher, and then, you know, going on depending on what else you're growing. And I think that's everything for light. So let's move on to what type of containers you'll use. Now moving on to the types of containers that you need to start seeds. And let me tell you, there are so many types of containers that you can use. I'm not going to talk about them all today, but anything that can hold soil, have some drainage, can be used to grow plants. I've seen people use newspaper that they've formed around like a form to create a little cup. I've seen people use coconut core planters. You can use toilet paper rolls. There are so many different types of containers that you can use to start your seeds. You can use egg cartons. It really, the list goes on. But here's even an example. I think this had like raspberries in it or something. So it has little drainage holes, or like, oh, I grew poppies in here. It has little holes in it already because it was a fruit container of some sort. I do like to recycle a lot of my food containers for growing things in. Even if you're not growing directly in them, sometimes they're nice if they don't have holes as a little like catchment. You can put them under certain pots so that you can bottom water. So I do recycle a lot of my food containers, for example, but you can also grow in them as well. Over the last few years, I've kind of invested in more heavy duty containers. So these are like harder plastic. I have a bunch of seed containers like this that are a little bit flimsier. These won't last me as long. These will last a few years if you take good care of them. But I've upgraded to these harder plastic containers because they do last a little bit longer, and because I'm reusing them every year, I wanted something that's going to hold up. These I've had for at least 2 years. These ones are, maybe these are 2 years old as well. I like the square containers because you can put them into seed trays like this, and you can have them all lined up, and this will hold 3 by maybe 7 or 6. So it's nice because I can put them all here. I can bottom water all of my plants, which I'll get into in a second. But it's nice because they fit in nicely, whereas the circle ones, they fit of course, but these ones just all sit nicer in the bottom tray. So I've been using plastic containers since I started gardening. And don't get me wrong, I think that they have their purpose. I really do like them. They make things easy. But I've been trying to get away from using plastic in the garden, so I've recently gotten into soil blocking. I think last year was my first year doing it, and I learned a lot. It was definitely a learning process, but I really enjoyed using this soil block. I could get way more on one of these trays than I did using these plastic containers. What's nice about soil blocking is that when you actually make the soil block, the edges of where the soil blocks kind of meet, there's an air gap there, and when the roots hit that air, it's called air pruning. So those roots stop growing at that point, so you don't get anything that's root bound. It will happen if you have a container, is that your plant, as it grows, the roots will just keep going around and around and around. They won't stop growing. They'll just keep tangling themselves. And once you have a plant that's root bound, depending on what type of plant it is, some plants don't like to have their roots disentangled, for example. So like melons are a prime example of that. They do not like having their roots disturbed. So once you take it out of the pot, and you do kind of want to tease apart those roots so that they're able to kind of grow down into the soil and find all the nutrients that they need. If you have something like a melon that's root bound, it usually doesn't do too well once you transplant it into the garden. Whereas if you had a plant that was in a soil block, those roots stop where the air hits it. So there's no potential for it to get root bound. So when you have a plant that's in a soil block, when you put it into the ground, those roots will just continue growing into the garden soil instead of still wrapping themselves around in that same shape or just tangling themselves in the roots that are already there. So like I said, I have learned quite a bit about soil blocking. This will be only my second year doing it, but I do really like it. It's a huge space saver, especially for like little things like flowers, which I've been starting to grow quite a bit of. They're great. So this is I think it's a 1.5 inch soil block. And then I have the tiny one that comes in like, I'm trying to see, like a 4x5 tiny little squares. Most things I think I'm going to start in this bigger block, except for like my flowers and stuff. I'll start with the smaller one, just so I don't have to transplant the smaller block into this block. So I think I'm just going to start big, because when you start your seeds in March, but you're not planting them into the ground until the end of May, there's a lot of chance of having to transplant things. So if I can stop one transplant, save me a little bit of time, definitely going to take it. All right, next up is a heat mat. So I only have one of these. Heat mats are great when you're starting seeds. It helps the germination process. So if a pepper seed, for example, it'll germinate without a heat mat, but it'll germinate quicker if you have a heat mat. So if you're in a rush or you want your plants to have like a good head start, having a heat mat is great. You only use a heat mat until the seeds essentially germinate, and then you can take the plants off the heat mat. So because of that, I only have one heat mat. I do start quite a bit of seeds, but I'll rotate them on the heat mat. So I'll switch them from day to day, and then once a tray, for example, germinates, then I'll take them off the heat mat and let them just sit on the shelf normally, and then I'll put a new tray of seeds on the heat mat. So I don't find that I need to have a ton of heat mats for my seeds. I do know that if you're starting a ton of seeds, having multiple heat mats is probably useful, but I just haven't found the need for it. And if I can get away with not buying a ton of stuff during garden season, it's always a good thing. This, I cannot remember where I got it from, but I want to say I just purchased it from a local garden center. You just plug it in. I just actually had this one plugged in because I had it outside and it was all cold and wasn't unrolling. So I just had it heated up. This one has no heat control on it. Some of them do. It's your preference, whatever you want to do. If you want to be able to control the amount of heat, great. If not, this one just plugs in. It doesn't get too warm, like I can hold it, no problem. But yeah, definitely recommend at least having one heat mat to start your seeds. I'm just going to show you this bag now so I can put it down. But this is what I start all my seeds in. It is the Pro Mix Moisture Mix, I guess. But that's what it looks like. I just get this at the local big box store. For any Canadians watching this, this is from Canadian Tire. So one thing that I want to say is that you do not need to start your seeds in seed starting mix. I don't. I used to when I first started gardening because I didn't know any better, but it's just one more thing that you have to buy. You can use regular soil for your starts. You don't need anything special. Seed starting mix is completely sterile. There's nothing in it to provide your seedlings with nutrients. So it's actually more work for you because you have to start the seeds. You have to buy the seed starting mix, which is different from the mix that you're going to transplant your seeds into after, or pot up if you're going to pot them up. So you have to buy it. It has no nutrients, so you're going to have to put nutrients in there once the plants get a little bit bigger, and they won't stay in that soil for very long because you'll notice that they aren't getting enough nutrients. So you're going to have to transplant them and pot them up into something bigger, but also something that has nutrients in it at a later time. So it just doesn't make sense to buy seed starting mix. You can start your seeds in a regular potting mix. I like this one because it's organic. It's meant for vegetables, so it has all of those nutrients in it that the plants will need. And yeah, instead of buying a bunch of other stuff, just go with something that has everything in it. So that's basically all I wanted to say about soil mixes. But I will say this, if you are doing soil blocking, you will need to make your own seed mix. And I will make a video on that, or I might actually have one already, but I will make a video on how I make my soil for soil blocking. Soil blocking soil has to have a little bit of different components in it so that it stays in the block shape when you're watering. Next up is labels. I actually don't have any labels with me at the moment. They're all in my garden shed outside, which isn't very helpful when you're planning on starting seeds. But I've kind of changed, or I kind of do a mixture of things. So for some pots, if it's a single pot, I'll just write what it is. I don't know if you can see, this was for a birdhouse gourd last year. I'll just write what it is in permanent marker on the outside. The pros and cons of writing things on containers. The pros, it's right on there. There's no mixing this up with anything else. It says birdhouse gourd, so whatever is inside, I'm assuming is a birdhouse gourd. I'm going to assume that I did everything correctly and labeled correctly. But sometimes your labels will either wash off with all the watering that you do, or because they're spending a lot of time outside right before you're putting them into the garden. For example, when you're hardening things off, sometimes this label actually gets bleached by the sun and disappears. So having them right on the container is great, or like written on the container, or even on like a popsicle stick or an actual label that sticks out is great. But you do have to keep that in mind, that sometimes the label can disappear by the sun or just being exposed to the elements. So I've used a bunch of different labels in the past. I've written on them, I've used popsicle sticks, I've used clothespins. So I'll write the name of whatever fruit or veggie, and then I'll put it on the side of the clothespin and I just attach it like this. Those were great. I've had like the big wooden sticks or plastic sticks that you put into each of the pots. Once again, those are great. The plastic ones I'm trying to get away from because, you know, I don't want to keep buying plastic. And the wooden ones are great, but sometimes they get moldy. So like I said, there's kind of pros and cons to all of them. What I've actually really enjoyed doing over the last few years is having my tray completely filled, and then I'll have either little pieces of tape for each column, and then, or each row, depending on how many I have. Or I will, if I'm soil blocking, I'll have, I'll take a photo of the entire seed tray, and I'll put a little like piece of tape in the top left corner so I know which way I'm oriented. And then I'll take a photo and use like an app and write what each of like the soil blocks or columns or whatever it is using a photo. I find that that's the easiest way for me to remember what's being grown. I don't have to worry about buying labels, having labels disappear, losing labels, like all that kind of stuff. If I know that this is the top left corner and write on a picture and it's in my phone, it makes things so much easier. I will say it does get a little bit tricky when you're transplanting or potting things up, because then you're going from this big tray to a bunch of different containers if that's what you're doing. But to start off, I do like doing it that way the best. That way it just seems it's easy, it's accessible in my phone. I can just look at it whenever I need, and I don't have to worry about any extras. So that's kind of what I've been doing, but it really is up to you, whatever your preference is. There's no really hard and fast rule to labeling. Just make sure you label. So next up for watering, once again, this isn't anything that's super complicated. You want to make sure that you have a watering can. I only bottom water right now, or like over the last few years, I've converted to just bottom watering. I find that my plants do so much better this way. So I just use a watering can, and I'll have all of my seeds, whether it's in seed blocks or in containers, in trays like this. And you essentially just water the bottom of the tray until it's, maybe a couple centimeters tall. Let all the plants absorb it, and then I just wait for the tops of the plants to look wet, and then I know that they're completely saturated. This is, to me, the easiest way to do it. You don't have to worry about overwatering and then flushing out some of the seeds that you just planted, for example. You don't have to worry about any type of mold growth or any type of bacterial infections, any issues with the leaves, because you're watering from the bottom. And I find that the plants just do better with bottom watering than they do with overhead watering. And the great thing about using a watering can and bottom watering is that you can water multiple plants at one time. So you can just water this entire tray instead of going from plant to plant and watering each one. So it makes it a little bit quicker when you're doing your watering for the week. And speaking of watering, how frequently should you do it? It honestly depends. The little soil blocks that I use for starting flowers, if I don't water them like every 2 days, they'll dry out and the plants will die. So those ones I have to do every couple days. Big plants in these types of containers, I usually do once a week. It would be kind of my Saturday tradition to water everything. But it really does depend on the plant, how big the plant is, what type of container it's in. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on your plant, which kind of brings me back to the shelving situation. Make sure that you're putting your plants somewhere that you're going to check on them. This is in my office, which I'm in quite frequently, so I'll be able to see when my plants are dry. If you have a basement that you're planning on using as your seed starting area, but you're very rarely down there so that you're not going to catch if your plants are dried out or not, maybe it's not the best place. So choose somewhere that, you kind of pass by all the time, so you can kind of peek in and see how your plants are doing, because it only takes like a couple days for your plants to completely die, and then you've wasted all that time, effort, and potentially money as well. So make sure that this is somewhere that is accessible to you and that you'll be checking up on. Which I know we're all gardeners, we're probably all looking at our plants all the time, but just in case, I just thought I'd put it out there. And last but not least, airflow. So all plants that you start indoors are in these kind of, I don't want to say sterile environments, but they are not exposed to the environment that they would if they were outdoors. So outside, animals would be brushing past them, the wind would be there. They're exposed to way more outside than they are inside. So to help them become stronger, healthier plants, having a fan or some type of air circulation around your plants helps to make healthier plants. So I have a little fan like this that you can hang, and it'll push air, of course, on your plants, and it actually just helps the stems become stronger. It's almost like working out. If you have a fan on them and your plants are constantly doing this, you don't want them really to be going this far back and forth, but it kind of just helps to strengthen the stem, which means that the plant can get bigger. If it's a tomato, for example, it can hold more fruit. There's so many benefits of having airflow on your plants. It also helps fungal growth as well. So not only is it stronger, but it's a healthier plant. So you can have little fans like this hanging, blowing on your plants throughout the day. I sometimes have one of those big like room fans that you would have to, if it's hot in your house. I have one positioned kind of right in front of the shelf, pushing this way onto the plant. That way it can kind of hit all of them at one time, as opposed to a small fan like this. You would almost need one per row of your shelves. So these ones are nice if you have just like a couple plants. They're small, they're compact. But if you have a big shelf like this, having a big fan that can push air onto everything just makes it's so much easier, and then you only have to buy one thing if you're buying something new. But most people have a fan in their house, so that's something that you could potentially not have to buy, whereas this you might not have at home. All right, and that is the seed starting video or seed supply starting video. I hope you learned a lot and got a lot out of this. If you did, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you have any other seed starting tips, please leave some messages down below. I'd love to hear them. And I hope you have a great week in the garden.